Today is July 29, 2024. My name is Rob Carr of Kalamazoo Right to Life. This is Pro-Life Week. Well, a few things today. We might be veering off from politics a little bit, which is, I guess, a good thing. Back on July 25th, the Florida Attorney General announced that 4 members of Jane's Revenge pleaded guilty to felonies in federal court. Now, do you remember what Jane's Revenge was? Think back to the Dobbs decision, or even when the initial draft of the Dobbs opinion was leaked back in May of 2022. There was a lot of protest by the pro-abortion people, and literally hundreds of churches and or pro-life organizations or crisis pregnancy centers were vandalized. And Jane's Revenge was one of the groups that was involved in some of this vandalism. And they would go to a pregnancy care center and they would spray paint the wall or the door. And one of their messages said, "If abortion's not safe, then neither are you." So it was a veiled threat to the physical life of the employees at the pregnancy care center. So these people were arrested, and the Attorney General of Florida kind of somewhat challenged the whole issue by saying that these individuals from Jane's Revenge should be prosecuted under the FACE Act, the same FACE Act that the Biden Justice Department has been going after pro-lifers. So they were facing the FACE Act, and they pleaded guilty. So there's a good chance that these 4 individuals will serve some jail time, possibly up to 10 years. I doubt they'll get that much, but I do think they will probably get a year or 2, maybe 3 years in prison for their acts of vandalism. So this is good news that finally, some pro-abortion people are facing, the reality of the consequences of their actions. Okay. Now, in a related issue, last week, a woman named Beverly Williams, 33-year-old mother of a 2-year-old, has been charged. She's a pro-lifer. She's been charged, or found guilty, I should say, found guilty of FACE Act violations for preaching in front of an abortion clinic. Now, that's kind of vague, so I have to believe she was probably blocking the entrance as she was preaching. And for that, she was arrested and prosecuted and convicted of a FACE Act violation. And she was sentenced last week to 41 months in prison. That's 3 years and 6 months in prison. And so if she's going to get 3.5 years in prison for standing and blocking an entrance, I think those other 4 individuals who spray painted and vandalized the actual physical building should at least get the same number of years, 3 years and 6 months, at least, because what they did was physical damage. All she did was just stand in front of the building. Okay, so, and we've talked before about this 2-tier system of justice, that they've targeted pro-lifers at the expense of pro-abortion people or like Black Lives Matter or Antifa, all these groups that seem to get away with a lot. Okay. Monday, President Biden has announced his plan to revamp the Supreme Court by imposing term limits. And first of all, the plan is going absolutely nowhere because it's a constitutional amendment. You need so much more than what Biden has or what the Democrats have to get this thing through Congress, let alone get it to the 38 states in the country to ratify it. I mean, it's going nowhere. But the very fact that he's doing it is atrocious. But the plan is to impose or to hold a term limit for each justice to 18 years. So theoretically, if it were to pass, the justices who were already in excess of 18 years would automatically be removed. Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. They'd be gone. And then, I guess the ultimate plan is for justices to when they hit their 18th year, they're gone and they're replaced. But the ultimate plan is to have kind of a rotating, a revolving door, I should say. So every 2 years, 2 justices would leave the bench, and the then president would be able to nominate 2 new justices. So in a 4-year term, a president could appoint 8 new justices. 8 of the 9 would be theoretically from his party or her party, whether it's a liberal or a conservative. And I mean, that could be very dangerous, very, very dangerous to pack the court like that. Because that is packing. That is packing the court. I mean, I think back, Roe v. Wade was decided by a 7-2 vote. And the conservatives were very upset that some of the Nixon appointees voted in favor of Roe. But you didn't see any conservative members of Congress, like the Senate or the House, calling for Nixon to revise the Supreme Court, to pack the court, or to impose term limits. And speaking of term limits, I saw a quote where Biden is talking about his time in the Senate. He says, I spent 30 years in the Senate, and then 8 years as vice president, and now 4 years, 3.5 years as president. So he spent 36 years in the U.S. Senate. Well, somehow, I'm not big in math, but somehow 36 years in the Senate seems longer than 18 years for a Supreme Court justice. Am I reading too much into this? I mean, if he's going to impose term limits on justices, they better impose term limits on the senators and the congressmen. You got some of these people there who've been there 40, 50 years. And true, every 2 years or every 6 years, they're up for re-election. But if some of these people are in very safe districts, it's just a rubber stamp. They're re-elected every year, every other year, and they're sent back to Washington. So we have term limits for the presidency. Biden now wants term limits for the justices. Well, should we think about term limits for congressmen, senators? I mean, we have that in Michigan, although that was revised. It's a little different now, but still, there's just food for thought. Okay, last item. A survey taken last year said they asked a question to 18 to 49-year-olds if they planned on having children. And the same question was asked back in 2018. 37% of the people who responded said no. It was very unlikely that they were going to have children. Well, in 2023, 5 years later, that number has jumped from 37% to 47%. So almost half of Americans aged 18 to 49 consider it unlikely that they are ever going to have children. And I'm thinking about our culture, Italy's culture, Ethiopia's culture, China's culture. It doesn't matter what culture we're talking about. I'm not talking about a white culture or a Asian culture. Every country has its own culture. So what do we pass on? Or better yet, how do we pass on our morals, our faith, our values, our traditions? How do we pass them on, and who do we pass them on to? We pass them on to our children. Or society passes them on to someone's children. I mean, they're not passed on to senior citizens or people who are retirees or people who are middle-aged. We pass on our values to our children. And that's how societies survive and thrive. I know it's a cliche, but that's how societies thrive, by passing on their culture to their children. And if we're going to have 50% of our young people of childbearing age adults, and they're not going to have children, what does that say for the future of our corporate societies worldwide? You know what we talked. They've talked before about you need a 2.1 birth rate as a replacement for those who are going to be passing away. 2.1. Well, I mean, there's some countries in Europe that are like 1.2. They're way below replacement level. And I think the US actually is below replacement level. And this survey proves the point. And if it went from 37 to 47% in 5 years, what is that survey going to say 5 years from now when they take it again? Is it going to be above 50%? Is it going to be 57%, 37, 47, 57%? I mean, those are frightening numbers when you're talking about preserving the culture of our world. And then you preserve it by having children. With that, I'll let you go. I'll see you next time.